The thundering hooves of Virgil Grayson's horse echoed through the towering pines of the Wyoming wilderness as dark clouds gathered overhead, threatening to unleash their fury on the rugged terrain. It was 1876, and Virgil had been riding for 3 days straight, putting as much distance as possible between himself and the ghosts that haunted him in Cheyenne. His weathered face, framed by a week's worth of stubble, betrayed the weariness of a man who had seen too much in his 30 years. The wind picked up, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of rain. Virgil tugged on the reins, bringing his chestnut mare to a halt. He patted her neck and surveyed the darkening sky. "Just our luck, Belle," he muttered, reaching for his canteen. "Looks like we're in for a downpour." Belle snorted in response, pawing at the ground impatiently. They needed shelter, and soon. Virgil had heard tell of a small settlement called Lusk not far ahead, perhaps another day's ride, but with the storm approaching, they wouldn't make it before nightfall. A deafening crack of thunder split the air, causing Belle to rear slightly. As Virgil calmed her, the skies opened up, and rain began to pour in sheets. He pulled his hat lower over his eyes and urged Belle forward. They needed to find somewhere to wait out the storm. Another flash of lightning illuminated the forest, and in that brief moment, Virgil spotted what appeared to be a small cabin nestled among the trees about a quarter-mile east. Hope surged within him. Maybe luck was on his side after all. "Come on, girl," he encouraged, steering Belle in the direction of the potential shelter. As they approached, the wind grew stronger, whipping the rain into a frenzy. The trees around them swayed dangerously, their branches creaking under the strain. Virgil was nearly to the cabin when a sound rose above the storm, a sound that made his blood run cold. A scream. Human. Female. Virgil halted, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip as he strained to hear over the howling wind. Another scream pierced the air, this time accompanied by a desperate plea for help. Without hesitation, Virgil dismounted, tying Belle to a nearby tree that offered some protection from the rain. He moved cautiously toward the source of the cries, his boots sinking into the mud with each step. The screams led him deeper into the woods, away from the cabin he'd spotted. "Hello," he called out, his voice nearly lost in the storm. "Where are you?" "Here," came the faint reply. "Please, I'm trapped." Virgil followed the voice, pushing through the underbrush until he came upon a horrifying scene. A massive pine had been struck by lightning and toppled, pinning a woman beneath its enormous trunk. She lay on her stomach, the lower half of her body trapped under the fallen tree. Her soaked dress clung to her form, and her dark hair hung in wet ropes around her face as she struggled futilely against the weight crushing her. "Hold on," Virgil called, rushing to her side. He knelt in the mud, assessing the situation. The woman's face was pale with fear and pain, her green eyes wide as they locked onto his. "Thank God," she gasped. I thought no one would come." "I'm here now," Virgil assured her, his voice steady despite the chaos of the storm around them. "What's your name?" "Nora," she replied, her teeth chattering from cold and shock. "Nora Ellis. I'm Virgil Grayson. I'm going to get you out of here, Nora, but I need to check how badly you're trapped first." He examined the fallen tree. It was massive, but had landed in such a way that it was partially supported by other debris, likely preventing it from crushing her completely. Still, she was firmly pinned, and he doubted he could move it on his own. "Can you feel your legs?" he asked, rain streaming down his face. Nora nodded weakly. "Yes, but my right one hurts something awful. I think it might be broken." Virgil stood, scanning the area. He needed leverage, something to pry the tree up enough for her to slide out. His eyes landed on a thick branch that had broken off in the storm. "I'm going to try to lift it," he explained, retrieving the branch and wedging it under the trunk near her trapped body. "When I say now, I need you to pull yourself out. Can you do that?" Fear flickered across Nora's face, but she set her jaw determinedly. "Yes." Virgil positioned himself to apply maximum force to his makeshift lever. "Ready. 1, 2, 3. He pushed down with all his strength, muscles straining against the impossible weight. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the trunk began to rise just inches, but enough. "Now, Nora," he shouted. With a pained cry, Nora clawed at the ground, dragging herself forward. Mud caked her dress and hands as she fought for freedom. Inch by agonizing inch, she pulled herself from beneath the tree until, with one final effort, she was free. Virgil released the branch, letting the tree crash back to the ground as he hurried to Nora's side. She was trembling violently, her face contorted with pain. "Let me see," he said gently, examining her leg. It was badly bruised and swollen at the ankle, but he couldn't tell if it was broken without a closer look. "We need to get you somewhere dry. There's a cabin nearby. Can you stand?" "I don't think so," she admitted, attempting to shift her weight and wincing sharply. Without another word, Virgil scooped her up in his arms. She was lighter than he expected, though the rain-soaked dress added considerable weight. Nora wrapped her arms around his neck, her body shivering against his. "Thank you," she whispered, her breath warm against his ear despite the cold rain. "I thought I was going to die out here." "Not today," Virgil replied, carefully navigating through the woods back toward Belle and the cabin he'd spotted. When they reached Belle, Virgil settled Nora on the saddle, then untied the horse and led them all toward the cabin. As they drew closer, he could see it was indeed a small hunting cabin, seemingly abandoned. "Is this yours?" Nora asked, clutching the saddle horn for balance. Virgil shook his head. "No, just lucky timing. Let's hope no one minds us borrowing it for the night." The cabin was simple but solid, a single room with a small wood stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed pushed against the far wall. Dust covered every surface, confirming Virgil's suspicion that it hadn't been used in some time. He helped Nora inside and gently lowered her onto the bed, before returning to secure Belle in a lean-to attached to the side of the cabin. Back inside, he busied himself lighting the wood stove with supplies he found stacked neatly in a corner. Soon, a small fire crackled to life, casting warm light throughout the cabin. Virgil turned to find Nora watching him, her green eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "You're good at that," she observed, her voice stronger now that they were out of the storm. "Spent enough nights in places like this," he replied, shrugging off his drenched coat and hanging it near the stove. "Let me take a look at that leg now." He approached the bed, and Nora hesitantly extended her injured leg toward him. With gentle hands, he removed her mud-caked boot and examined her ankle, which had swollen considerably. "I don't think it's broken," he said after careful inspection. "Sprained bad, though." "You're lucky. That tree could have done a lot worse." "I know," Nora said quietly. She looked down at her soaked, muddy dress. "I must look a fright." Virgil allowed himself a small smile. Despite the circumstances, he couldn't help noticing that she was beautiful, delicate features framed by dark hair that was beginning to dry in soft waves around her face. "You look like someone who survived being crushed by a tree," he replied. "I'd say that's something to be proud of." He retrieved his saddlebag from Belle and pulled out a spare shirt. "It's not much, but it's dry. I'll step outside while you change." Nora accepted the offering with grateful hands. "You don't have to go out in the storm again, just turn around." Virgil nodded and faced the wall, listening to the rustle of fabric as Nora struggled to change. He heard a soft gasp of pain and fought the urge to turn. "You need help?" he asked, Keeping his eyes fixed on the rough-hewn logs of the cabin wall, there was a pause. "I'm decent now. Just having trouble with the buttons." Virgil turned to find Nora sitting on the edge of the bed, his blue shirt hanging loosely on her smaller frame. Her wet dress lay in a heap on the floor beside her. Her fingers trembled as she attempted to fasten the remaining buttons. "May I?" he asked, approaching cautiously. Nora nodded, dropping her hands to her lap. Virgil knelt before her, his calloused fingers making quick work of the buttons. He was acutely aware of her gaze on his face, of her breathing, of the scent of pine and rain that clung to her skin. "What were you doing out there alone in the storm?" he asked, finishing the last button and rising to his feet. Nora looked away, her expression clouding. "I was headed to Lusk. My uncle has a store there. I was supposed to arrive yesterday, but my horse went lame about 5 miles back. I was trying to continue on foot when the storm hit." Virgil frowned. "That's dangerous country for anyone to travel alone, especially a woman." A flash of defiance lit her eyes. "I didn't have much choice. My father died 3 months ago. There's nothing left for me in Cheyenne now." The mention of Cheyenne made Virgil stiffen. "I'm sorry about your father," he said, turning away to hide his reaction. "Were you headed to Lusk too?" Nora asked. "Just passing through," Virgil replied vaguely. He wasn't ready to share his own story, not with a stranger, no matter how intriguing. "Well, Mr. Grayson, it seems fate had you passing through at exactly the right moment," Nora said softly. "I owe you my life." Virgil waved away her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same. But it wasn't anyone, it was you." Her eyes held his, sincere and penetrating, as if she could see past the walls he'd built around himself. "So, thank you." Uncomfortable with her gratitude, Virgil busied himself preparing a simple meal from the provisions in his saddlebag. They ate in relative silence, the storm continuing to rage outside. Eventually, Nora's eyelids began to droop, exhaustion from her ordeal catching up with her. "You should rest," Virgil said, gathering their plates. "Take the bed. I'll manage on the floor." Nora looked as if she might argue, but then nodded, carefully shifting to lie down. She winced as she moved her injured leg. "I'll need to wrap that ankle properly in the morning," Virgil said. "Try not to move it too much." "I'll try," she promised, pulling the rough blanket up to her chin. "Good night, Mr. Grayson." "Virgil," he corrected. "Just Virgil." A small smile touched her lips. "Good night, Virgil." "Good night, Nora." Virgil spread his bedroll on the floor near the stove and stretched out, listening to the storm and the soft sound of Nora's breathing as it gradually slowed and deepened with sleep. He stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. He hadn't planned on company on this journey, certainly not a beautiful woman with haunting green eyes. He'd left Cheyenne to escape, to outrun the memories and the guilt that plagued him. The last thing he needed was a complication like Nora Ellis. Yet as sleep finally claimed him, Virgil couldn't deny the strange sense of purpose he felt. For the first time in months, he'd done something good. He'd saved a life instead of taking one. Perhaps that counted for something. Morning broke clear and bright, the storm having passed during the night. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's single window, falling across Nora's sleeping form. Virgil had already been up for hours, tending to Belle and scouting the area around the cabin. When he returned, Nora was awake, attempting to stand. "What are you doing?" he asked, rushing to her side as she wobbled precariously. "Testing my leg," she replied, grimacing as she put weight on her injured ankle. "I need to find my horse. All my belongings I already looked," Virgil interrupted, guiding her back to the bed. "Found a bay gelding about a mile south, still saddled. Brought him back with your things." Relief washed over Nora's face. "Thank you. Again." "Let me wrap that ankle before you try walking on it," Virgil said, retrieving a strip of cloth from his saddlebag. He worked in silence, his touch gentle as he bound her swollen ankle tightly. Nora watched him, curious about this quiet, competent man who had appeared out of nowhere to rescue her. "You have a healer's hands," she observed. "Gentle but sure." Virgil's expression flickered briefly. "My mother was a healer of sorts, taught me a few things. She died when I was 16. "I'm sorry," Nora said softly. "My mother died when I was born. I never knew her." Virgil finished wrapping her ankle and sat back on his heels. "That's hard." "It was harder on my father, I think," Nora replied. "He never remarried, said no one could replace her. He must have loved her very much." "He did." Nora's eyes grew distant. "When he died, it felt like I lost them both all over again. That's why I'm going to Lusk." "Uncle Henry is the only family I have left." Virgil nodded, understanding loss all too well. "We should head out soon if you're able. The weather's fair, but it's still a good day's ride to Lusk." "I can manage," Nora assured him, cautiously testing her wrapped ankle. It still hurt, but the tight binding provided enough support for her to stand. "See? Much better." They broke their fast with the last of Virgil's provisions, then prepared to depart. Virgil helped Nora change back into her now dry dress, turning his back as she slipped out of his shirt. Once she was decent, he assisted her with the buttons at the back of her dress, his fingers occasionally brushing against her skin and sending unexpected warmth through both of them. Outside, Virgil helped Nora mount her gelding, making sure she was secure before swinging up onto Belle. The forest was transformed in the morning light, the violence of the previous night's storm evident in fallen branches and new clearings where trees had toppled. "If we keep a steady pace, we should reach Lusk by sundown," Virgil said, orienting himself by the position of the sun. "Can you manage that with your ankle?" Nora nodded determinedly. "I'll be fine. Lead the way." They rode side by side where the trail allowed, Virgil keeping a watchful eye on Nora's comfort. She sat tall in the saddle despite her injury, and he found himself admiring her resilience. "Have you lived in Wyoming long?" Nora asked as they navigated a particularly beautiful stretch of pine forest. "Born and raised," Virgil replied. "My father had a small ranch outside Laramie. Lost it in '67. Bad winter, worse debts." "What did you do after?" Virgil's jaw tightened. "This and that. Drove cattle for a while, did some scouting for the army." He deliberately left out the darker chapters, the bounty hunting, the gunfights, the blood on his hands. "And now," Nora pressed gently, "now I'm just a man on a horse headed wherever the trail leads." Nora studied him, sensing there was much more to his story. "Everyone's running from something, I suppose." Virgil glanced at her sharply. "What makes you think I'm running?" "The look in your eyes," she said simply. "I recognize it. It's the same one I see in the mirror." They fell silent after that, each lost in their own thoughts as they continued their journey. The day warmed pleasantly, wildflowers dotting the meadows they crossed. In another circumstance, it might have been a leisurely, enjoyable ride. Around midday, they stopped by a clear stream to rest the horses and eat the jerky Virgil had stored in his saddlebag. Nora eased herself down from her horse, wincing as her injured ankle took her weight. "Here," Virgil said, offering his arm for support. "Lean on me." Nora accepted his help, her hand warm on his forearm. He guided her to a fallen log where she could sit comfortably. "You should soak that ankle," Virgil suggested, nodding toward the stream. "Cold water will help with the swelling." Nora smiled gratefully. "That sounds heavenly." Virgil helped her to the stream's edge, then turned away to give her privacy as she removed her boot and stocking. The sound of her sigh as she submerged her injured foot in the cool water made him smile despite himself. "Better?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder. Much, Nora confirmed, her face relaxed for the first time since he'd found her. Sunlight filtered through the leaves above, dappling her features with golden light. You know, for a man who claims to be just passing through, you take remarkable care of strangers. Virgil busied himself with the horses, uncomfortable with her observation. Just doing what anyone would do. There you go again, dismissing your own kindness, Nora said. I'm beginning to think it's a habit with you, Mr. Grayson. Virgil, he corrected automatically. Virgil, she repeated, her voice softening around his name in a way that made something stir in his chest. Why is it so hard for you to accept gratitude? He paused, his hand resting on Belle's flank. Because I haven't done anything to deserve it. You saved my life, Nora countered. I'd say that deserves quite a lot of gratitude. Virgil didn't answer. How could he explain that one good deed couldn't wash away the things he'd done? That the weight of his past sins was far heavier than the tree he'd lifted off her. They continued their journey after Nora had rested her ankle, the terrain gradually changing as they approached Lusk. The dense forest gave way to rolling hills and scattered stands of pine. By late afternoon, they could see smoke from chimneys in the distance. Almost there, Virgil observed, pointing to the small settlement nestled in the valley below. Nora's expression was a mix of relief and something that might have been regret. Yes, almost there. As they rode into Lusk, Virgil was struck by how small and isolated it was, just a main street with a handful of businesses, a church, and scattered houses. Nothing like Cheyenne with its railroad and bustling commerce. Perhaps that was for the best. Less chance of being recognized here. My uncle's store should be at the end of the street, Nora said, pointing to a two-story building with Ellis General Merchandise painted across its facade. A sense of disappointment settled in Virgil's chest as they approached the store. Their journey was ending, and he would soon be on his way alone again. He hadn't realized until this moment how much he'd enjoyed Nora's company, brief as it had been. A tall, gray-haired man emerged from the store as they dismounted, his face lighting up with recognition. Nora, thank God! He exclaimed, hurrying down the steps. I was about to send out a search party. You were due yesterday. Uncle Henry, Nora greeted him with a tired smile. I'm sorry to have worried you. I ran into some trouble on the way. Henry Ellis enveloped his niece in a fierce hug before stepping back to examine her. His eyes widened at the sight of her mud-stained dress and wrapped ankle. What happened? Are you hurt? His gaze shifted to Virgil, suddenly wary. And who is this? This is Virgil Grayson, Nora said, her voice warm with gratitude. He saved my life during the storm last night. A tree fell and trapped me. I'd be dead if not for him. Henry's expression transformed instantly. He strode forward, hand extended. Mr. Grayson, I can't thank you enough. Nora is all the family I have left in this world. Virgil shook the offered hand, uncomfortable with the man's effusive gratitude. Just happened to be passing by at the right time, sir. Nonsense, Henry declared. You're a hero, plain and simple. You must stay with us tonight at the very least. We have a spare room above the store. Virgil hesitated, glancing at Nora. She was watching him with those penetrating green eyes, a silent plea in them. I wouldn't want to impose, he said half-heartedly. It's no imposition, Henry insisted. It's the least we can do to thank you. Nora stepped forward, her hand lightly touching Virgil's arm. Please stay, at least for the night. You must be tired after our journey. Virgil knew he should refuse. Staying in one place too long was dangerous, but the thought of riding away from Nora so soon was inexplicably painful. All right, he conceded. One night. Henry beamed. Excellent. Let me show you where to stable your horse, and then we'll get you both settled inside. Nora needs to rest that ankle, and you both look like you could use a hot meal. As Henry led Virgil toward the small stable behind the store, Nora remained on the boardwalk, watching them go. There was something about Virgil Grayson that intrigued her deeply, the gentle hands that belied his rough exterior, the sadness that lurked behind his eyes, the way he dismissed his own heroism, as if he were unworthy of praise. She found herself hoping that one night might stretch into something longer. The Ellis home above the general store was modest but comfortable, with a small parlor, kitchen, and 3 bedrooms. Henry had lived alone since his wife passed 5 years earlier, and the feminine touches around the home had faded with time. After showing Virgil to the spare room, Henry insisted on examining Nora's ankle himself. He had been the closest thing to a doctor in Lusk for many years, tending to minor injuries and illnesses when no physician was available. "Virgil did a fine job wrapping this," Henry remarked, inspecting Virgil's handiwork. "But you'll need to stay off it for at least a week, maybe 2. Nora sighed, frustrated by the limitation. "I was hoping to help you in the store right away." "The store has managed this long without you," Henry said kindly. "It can wait until you're healed." While Henry prepared dinner, Virgil helped Nora settle on the small sofa in the parlor, propping her injured ankle on a cushion. "Your uncle seems like a good man," Virgil observed, taking a seat in the armchair across from her. "He is," Nora agreed. "He and my father were very close. After my mother died, Uncle Henry helped raise me while Father worked. When his wife died without giving him children, I became like a daughter to him." "You're fortunate to have such family," Virgil said softly. "What about your family?" Nora asked. "You mentioned your parents are gone, but do you have siblings? Anyone waiting for you somewhere?" Virgil shook his head. "No one. Not anymore." The sadness in his voice touched something in Nora. She wanted to reach out to offer comfort, but sensed he would reject it. Instead, she changed the subject. "Tell me about your travels. You must have seen interesting places." For the next hour, Virgil entertained her with carefully edited tales of his journeys across the Western Territories. He spoke of majestic mountains, vast prairies, and the characters he'd encountered along the way, deliberately omitting the darker aspects of his past. Nora listened attentively, her eyes bright with curiosity and something warmer that made Virgil's heart beat a little faster. Dinner was a simple but hearty affair: venison stew with fresh, baked bread. Henry peppered Virgil with questions about his background and plans, which Virgil answered as truthfully as he dared. He found himself relaxing in the comfortable atmosphere of the Ellis home, a dangerous feeling of belonging creeping into his consciousness. After the meal, Henry excused himself to attend to some bookkeeping for the store, leaving Virgil and Nora alone in the parlor once again. A comfortable silence stretched between them as the lamps cast a warm glow throughout the room. "Will you really leave tomorrow?" Nora asked finally, her voice soft. Virgil stared into the small fire burning in the grate. "That was the plan. Plans can change." He looked up to find her watching him intently. "Nora, Uncle Henry could use help in the store," she interrupted. "Especially with me laid up like this. He's not as young as he used to be, and the spring shipments are arriving soon." Virgil raised an eyebrow. "Are you offering me a job?" "Would that be so terrible?" Nora challenged. "You said yourself you're just wandering. Why not wander here for a while?" The offer was tempting, more tempting than it should have been. Virgil had planned to keep moving to stay ahead of his past. But the thought of a few quiet weeks in Lusk, of seeing Nora's smile each day— "I'll think about it," he said finally. Nora's face brightened. "That's not a no." "It's not a yes either," Virgil warned, but he couldn't help returning her smile. Later that night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Virgil weighed his options. Staying in Lusk was risky. If word reached Cheyenne of his whereabouts, trouble would surely follow. But the idea of riding out tomorrow, of leaving Nora behind when he'd only just found her, left an emptiness in his chest he couldn't explain. Morning came too soon. Virgil rose at dawn, his decision made. He would thank the Ellises for their hospitality and continue on his way. It was safer that way for everyone. He packed his meager belongings and made his way downstairs, expecting to find the house still quiet with sleep. Instead, he found Henry already awake, brewing coffee in the kitchen. "Ah, Mr. Grayson. You're an early riser too, I see," Henry greeted him cheerfully. "Coffee, please," Virgil replied, setting his saddlebag on a chair. "And thank you for your hospitality, but I should be on my way soon." Henry's smile dimmed. "So Nora mentioned you might say, heading anywhere in particular?" Virgil shrugged. "West, maybe. I haven't decided." Henry studied him over the rim of his coffee cup. "You know, Mr. Grayson, I've lived long enough to recognize a man running from something. I won't pry into what that might be, but I will say this. Sometimes the path forward lies in standing still." Before Virgil could respond, a crash from upstairs interrupted them. Both men were on their feet instantly, Virgil's hand automatically reaching for his revolver. "Nora," Henry called, already moving toward the stairs. They found her on the floor of her bedroom, having apparently fallen while trying to dress herself. "I'm fine," she insisted, though her face was pale with pain. "I just lost my balance." Virgil and Henry helped her to the edge of the bed. Her ankle was visibly more swollen than the previous day. "You've aggravated it," Henry scolded gently. "What were you thinking, trying to dress alone?" Nora's eyes flicked to Virgil, then away. "I heard voices. I thought. I wanted to say goodbye before you left." The vulnerability in her voice struck Virgil like a physical blow. He really looked at her, and saw not just the beautiful woman he'd rescued, but someone as wounded in her way as he was in his. Someone who understood loss and loneliness. In that moment, his decision wavered. "Perhaps I could stay a few days," he found himself saying, "to help out until Nora's ankle is better." The hope that bloomed on Nora's face was worth any risk, he decided. A few days. What harm could come of that? Those few days stretched into a week, then two. Virgil found himself settling into a routine in Lusk. During the day, he helped Henry in the store, unloading supplies, organizing inventory, and assisting customers. In the evenings, he joined the Ellis family for dinner, the conversation flowing more easily with each passing day. And through it all, there was Nora. As her ankle healed, she began moving around the house more, often sitting in the store to keep them company. Virgil found his eyes drawn to her constantly, her smile when she greeted customers, the graceful movement of her hands as she worked on mending, the thoughtful expression she wore when reading one of her beloved books. They talked for hours, sharing stories and thoughts. Virgil found himself revealing more about his past than he had to anyone in years, though still carefully editing the darkest parts. Nora told him of her life in Cheyenne, of her father's business as a blacksmith, of her dreams to someday travel east and see the cities she'd only read about. 2 weeks after his arrival in Lusk, Virgil was restocking shelves when the bell above the store door jingled. He turned to greet the customer and froze. Sheriff Marcus Tate from Cheyenne stood in the doorway, his eyes widening with recognition. "Virgil Grayson," Tate said slowly. "Didn't expect to find you here." Virgil carefully set down the can he was holding. "Sheriff, what brings you to Lusk?" "Passing through on my way back from Deadwood," Tate replied, his hand casually resting near his gun. "Got some business with a man named Ellis. He around?" "I'm Ellis," Henry said, emerging from the back room. "What can I do for you, Sheriff?" Tate's eyes remained fixed on Virgil. "First, You might want to know who you've got working for you. This man is wanted for questioning in Cheyenne regarding a shooting 3 months back." Henry looked between Virgil and the sheriff, confusion evident on his face. "There must be some mistake," he began, but Virgil cut him off. "It's not a mistake, Henry," he said quietly, "but it's not what it sounds like either." "What it sounds like," Tate continued, "is that Grayson here shot a man named James Blackwell outside the Silver Dollar Saloon and then disappeared before I could question him properly." The bell above the door jingled again as Nora entered, leaning slightly on a cane. She stopped short at the tableau before her. "What's happening?" she asked, her eyes fixing on Virgil's tense posture. Tate turned toward her, his expression softening slightly at the sight of a lady. "Madam, I'm Sheriff Tate from Cheyenne. I'm afraid your employee here has been keeping some secrets." "It was self-defense," Virgil said flatly. "Blackwell drew first. Ask anyone who was there." "That's for a judge to decide," Tate replied. "You should have stayed to tell your side instead of running." Nora moved to stand beside Virgil, her presence a silent statement of support. "If Virgil says it was self-defense, then I believe him." Tate sighed. "Look, I'm not here to arrest you, Grayson. Like I said, you're wanted for questioning. Blackwell had powerful friends who want answers. If you come back to Cheyenne voluntarily, it'll go easier." Virgil's mind raced. He'd been a fool to think he could outrun his past. Now he'd dragged the Ellises into his troubles. "When do you head back?" he asked finally. "Day after tomorrow," Tate answered. "Think about it. You know where to find me." With a tip of his hat to Nora and Henry, he turned and left the store. Silence fell heavy in his wake. Virgil couldn't bring himself to look at Nora or Henry, shame burning in his chest. "I should have told you," he said to the floor. "I'm sorry." "Is it true?" Henry asked. "Was it self-defense?" Virgil nodded. "Blackwell was drunk, accused me of cheating at cards. When I walked away, he followed me outside, drew on me. I was faster." "Then why run?" Nora asked softly. Virgil finally looked up, meeting her gaze. "Because Blackwell was Jacob Harrington's nephew. Harrington owns half of Cheyenne, including the judge. I wouldn't get a fair hearing." Understanding dawned on Henry's face. "Jacob Harrington, I've heard stories." "They're probably true," Virgil said grimly. "He's not a man who forgives." Nora stepped closer, her hand finding Virgil's. "So what will you do?" "What I should have done 3 weeks ago. Move on. Head west, maybe to Montana or Idaho. And keep running forever," Nora challenged. "Is that really living, Virgil?" Her words hit their mark. Was he living, or merely existing? These past weeks in Lusk had been the closest thing to peace he'd known in years, and much of that was due to the woman standing before him, her hand warm in his. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door," he said, looking between Nora and Henry. "You've been kind to me. You deserve better than this. Why don't we discuss this upstairs?" Henry suggested, eyeing the window where curious townsfolk were beginning to gather, drawn by the sheriff's visit. "I'll put the closed sign up for lunch." Upstairs, Henry poured 3 glasses of whiskey, handing one to Virgil and offering another to Nora, who accepted it with a raised eyebrow. "Medicinal," Henry explained with a slight smile. "For the shock." They settled in the parlor, Nora beside Virgil on the sofa, Henry in his usual chair. "Now," Henry said after taking a fortifying sip, "tell us everything. From the beginning." So Virgil did. He told them about his years after losing the family ranch, the work as a ranch hand, a scout for the army, and eventually as a bounty hunter. He spoke of the men he'd tracked, some brought in alive, others not. Of how the violence had worn on him until he couldn't stand it anymore. How he'd gone to Cheyenne to start fresh, taking odd jobs and keeping to himself, until the night at the Silver Dollar when his past caught up with him. "Blackwell knew me from my bounty hunting days," Virgil explained. Had a cousin I'd brought in for horse theft. He was drunk, looking for a fight. I tried to walk away, but he wouldn't let you," Nora finished for him. Virgil nodded. "After I shot him, I knew Harrington would never let it go to a fair trial, so I ran. Been running ever since until you found me trapped under that tree," Nora said softly. "Yes." Virgil met her gaze, his heart pounding. "Until I found you." Henry cleared his throat. "It seems to me you have three options, Virgil. You can run again, heading west as you planned. You can go back to Cheyenne with Tate and take your chances with the law. Or, Virgil prompted when Henry paused. "Or you can stay here and face whatever comes," Henry finished. "You wouldn't face it alone." The offer stunned Virgil. "You'd stand with me knowing what I've done." "What you've done is save my niece's life," Henry said firmly. "As far as I'm concerned, that earns you the benefit of the doubt. Besides, Lusk isn't Cheyenne. Harrington's influence doesn't reach as far as he thinks." Virgil looked to Nora, whose eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "And you? What do you think I should do?" "I think," she said carefully, "that when you found me under that tree, you didn't just save my life. You gave me a chance at a new one. Maybe I can help you do the same." The simple sincerity in her voice touched something deep within Virgil, a place he'd thought long dead. For the first time in years, he felt the stirring of hope. "I need to think," he said finally. "This affects all of us." Henry nodded in understanding. "Take all the time you need." Virgil excused himself, needing air and space to clear his head. He walked through Lusk, barely noticing his surroundings as he weighed his options. Each path held risks, but only one offered the possibility of something he'd long ago stopped believing he deserved: a home, a future, a chance at redemption. As the sun began to set, Virgil found himself at the small church at the edge of town. It was empty, peaceful. He sat in the back pew, not praying, it had been too long for that, but thinking, remembering. He thought of his mother's gentle hands, so like his own, as she tended to neighbors' ailments. Of his father's weathered face as he fought to save their ranch from creditors and harsh winters. Of the man he'd been before violence became his trade. Of the man he might still become if given the chance. And he thought of Nora, her courage, her kindness, the way her eyes lit up when she smiled. In the short time he'd known her, she'd awakened feelings he'd thought long buried. She made him want to be worthy of her regard. By the time he returned to the Ellis home, night had fallen. Henry had gone to bed, but Nora waited in the parlor, a book open but unread in her lap. She looked up as he entered, hope and fear warring in her expression. "I've made my decision," Virgil said quietly, taking a seat beside her. Nora closed her book, her hands trembling slightly. "And? I'm going to talk to Tate tomorrow. Tell him I'll go back to Cheyenne and face the charges." Disappointment flickered across Nora's face before she mastered it. "I see, you think that's best." "I think it's the only way I'll ever stop running," Virgil explained. "But I'm not going alone. I'd like you and Henry to come with me if you're willing, as witnesses to my character." Hope returned to Nora's eyes. "You want us with you?" "I do, more than that." Virgil took a deep breath, reaching for her hand. "I want to come back here afterward, with you, if that's something you might want to." Nora's fingers interlaced with his, warm and sure. "It's what I want more than anything." Virgil raised their joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then I'll have something worth fighting for." The next morning, Virgil found Sheriff Tate at the small hotel on the edge of town. The lawman was surprised by Virgil's decision but seemed pleased to avoid a confrontation. "We'll leave tomorrow morning," Tate confirmed. "Trial's set for next week." "I'm bringing witnesses," Virgil informed him. "Henry Ellis and his niece will be traveling with us." Tate frowned. "This isn't a trial party, Grayson." "They're coming as character witnesses," Virgil insisted. and to make sure Harrington doesn't arrange any accidents on the trail. The sheriff had the grace to look uncomfortable at the implication. Fine, but they're your responsibility. When Virgil returned to the store, he found Henry and Nora already preparing for the journey. Henry had arranged for a neighbor to watch the store, and Nora was packing provisions with the efficiency of someone used to travel. All set with Tate? Henry asked, looking up from the ledger he was updating. Virgil nodded. We leave at dawn tomorrow. It's about 3 days to Cheyenne at an easy pace. My ankle's much better, Nora assured him, correctly interpreting his concerned glance. I can ride without issue now. That evening, after Henry had retired, Virgil and Nora found themselves alone in the parlor once more. The fire crackled softly in the grate, casting a warm glow over the room. Outside, a light snow had begun to fall, the first of the season. Are you afraid? Nora asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Virgil considered the question. Not of facing the charges. I know what happened that night, and I'll tell the truth. I'm more afraid of. Of what? Of losing this, he admitted, gesturing between them. Of losing the chance to see what this could become. Nora moved closer to him on the sofa, her skirts rustling softly. You won't lose me, Virgil, no matter what happens in Cheyenne. You can't promise that, he said gently. If things go badly, then we'll face it together, she interrupted. The way you faced that fallen tree to save me, the way I hope we'll face everything from now on. Her certainty humbled him. Virgil reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. Nora Ellis, you are the most remarkable woman I've ever known. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. And you, Virgil Grayson, are worth fighting for. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Virgil leaned forward. Their lips met in a kiss so gentle it was barely a touch, yet it sent warmth coursing through his entire being. Nora's hand came up to rest against his chest, over his heart, as she returned the kiss with equal tenderness. When they parted, Virgil rested his forehead against hers. Whatever happens in Cheyenne, know that you saved me as surely as I saved you. Then we're even, Nora whispered, a smile curving her lips, and can start fresh. The journey to Cheyenne took 4 days rather than 3, slowed by an unexpected early snowfall. Tate grew increasingly irritable as the delay continued, but Virgil found himself almost grateful for the extra time. Each day on the trail was another day with Nora, before facing whatever awaited them in Cheyenne. They camped together at night, Tate keeping a watchful eye on Virgil despite Henry's assurances that his prisoner wouldn't run. Virgil and Nora stayed close, their bond strengthening with each passing mile. They spoke of their hopes, their dreams, the future they might build together if fate allowed. On the 4th evening, with the lights of Cheyenne visible in the distance, Virgil pulled Nora aside while Henry distracted Tate with questions about the upcoming territorial elections. Whatever happens tomorrow, Virgil said urgently, know that these past weeks have been the happiest of my life. Nora's eyes shimmered in the firelight. Mine too. I need you to promise me something, he continued. If things go badly, if Harrington's influence is as strong as I fear, don't wait for me. Go back to Lusk with Henry. Live your life. Virgil, promise me, he insisted. I couldn't bear the thought of you wasting your life waiting for me. Nora's expression hardened with determination. I will make no such promise. We're in this together, remember. Besides, you're innocent. The truth has to count for something. Virgil wished he shared her faith in justice, but years of watching the powerful bend the law to their will had left him cynical. Still, her belief gave him strength. He leaned down, kissing her softly under the vast Wyoming sky, memorizing the feel of her in his arms. They reached Cheyenne the next day, riding into town around noon. Eyes followed them as they made their way to the sheriff's office, whispers spreading like wildfire at the sight of Virgil Grayson back in town. Tate led them directly to the courthouse, where Judge William Porter was hearing cases. The aging judge looked up with interest as they entered, his gaze sharpening when it landed on Virgil. "Sheriff Tate, I see you've brought back our fugitive." "Yes, Your Honor," Tate confirmed. "Grayson has agreed to face questioning about the Blackwell shooting." Porter nodded. "We'll hear this matter immediately. The Blackwell case has been on my docket far too long." As word spread through town, the courtroom quickly filled with curious onlookers. Henry and Nora sat directly behind Virgil, their presence a comfort as he faced the judge. Among the spectators, Virgil spotted Jacob Harrington, a portly man with cold eyes and an expensive suit, flanked by two men whose bulging coats likely concealed weapons. Judge Porter called the court to order. "Virgil Grayson, you stand accused of the murder of James Blackwell on the night of July 14, 1876. How do you plead?" "Not guilty by reason of self-defense, Your Honor," Virgil replied firmly. Porter raised an eyebrow. "Very well. Sheriff Tate, present the facts as you know them." Tate stepped forward, recounting what he knew of the night in question, how he'd arrived at the Silver Dollar after shots were fired to find Blackwell dead on the ground and Virgil gone. "Witnesses at the scene gave conflicting accounts," Tate admitted. "Some said Blackwell drew first, others claimed Grayson provoked him." "And do any of those witnesses appear today?" Porter asked. From the gallery, 3 men stood, all employees of the Silver Dollar. One by one, they gave their testimony. The first, a bartender named Sullivan, claimed he couldn't see who drew first from his position inside. The second, a piano player named Wilson, testified that Blackwell had been drunk and belligerent all evening, picking fights with several patrons. The third witness, a man named Cooper who worked security at the saloon, was the most damning. Grayson provoked Blackwell, he claimed, taunted him about his cousin, then drew on him when they got outside. Virgil's heart sank. Cooper was known to be on Harrington's payroll. His testimony was no surprise, but it was troubling nonetheless. "You have any witnesses of your own, Mr. Grayson?" Porter asked. Virgil stood. "Your Honor, I have 2 character witnesses who can speak to my conduct since leaving Cheyenne. And I would like to testify on my own behalf regarding the events of that night." Porter nodded. "Proceed with your testimony first." Virgil took a deep breath and told his version of events, how Blackwell had recognized him from his bounty hunting days, how the drunk man had accused him of cheating, how Virgil had walked away only to be followed outside. "I tried to defuse the situation," Virgil explained. "Told him to go home and sleep it off. That's when he went for his gun. I reacted. It was him or me, Your Honor." "And why did you flee the scene?" Porter asked, his expression unreadable. Virgil glanced at Harrington before answering. "Because I knew James Blackwell was Jacob Harrington's nephew. I didn't believe I'd get a fair hearing." Murmurs swept through the courtroom. Porter banged his gavel for silence. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Grayson." "It's the truth, Your Honor." Porter turned to Harrington. "Mr. Harrington, do you wish to address the court regarding this matter?" Harrington rose, his face a mask of grieved dignity. "Your Honor, I'm here only as a bereaved uncle seeking justice for my sister's boy. The suggestion that I would interfere with the course of justice is both offensive and absurd. Yet you've been seen conferring with witnesses before today's hearing." Henry Ellis spoke up from the gallery, rising to his feet. "Including Mr. Cooper there, who was observed receiving money from one of your men not an hour ago." Shock rippled through the courtroom. Porter's gaze sharpened. "Mr. Ellis, you're out of order. However, given the seriousness of this allegation, Sheriff Tate, is there any truth to this claim? Tate shifted uncomfortably. I can't say for certain, Your Honor. I can, came a new voice from the back of the courtroom. All heads turned to see a tall man with a badge pinned to his vest making his way forward. Federal Marshal James Donovan. I've been investigating Mr. Harrington for witness tampering in several cases across the territory. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Porter banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order. Harrington's face had gone pale, his eyes darting toward the exits where his men stood. Marshal Donovan, Porter acknowledged once quiet had been restored. This is highly irregular. What evidence do you have regarding this case specifically? Donovan approached the bench, presenting a folder of documents. Sworn statements from 2 witnesses who were threatened into changing their testimony, including the bartender Sullivan here, and financial records showing payments to Mr. Cooper that coincide with court dates. Sullivan looked down, shame evident on his face. Cooper had gone pale, edging toward the door until one of Marshal Donovan's deputies blocked his path. Porter reviewed the documents, his expression growing grimmer by the minute. Finally, he looked up, surveying the courtroom. In light of this new evidence, I am recessing this hearing until tomorrow morning. Sheriff Tate, please take Mr. Cooper into custody for questioning. Marshal Donovan, I'd like to review your evidence more thoroughly in my chambers. He fixed Harrington with a cold stare. Mr. Harrington, I strongly suggest you remain available to the court. Harrington stood, straightening his expensive coat. This is outrageous. My attorneys will— Your attorneys can speak to me tomorrow, Porter cut him off. This court is in recess. As the courtroom cleared, Virgil turned to Henry and Nora, disbelief evident on his face. What just happened? He asked quietly. Henry smiled, looking surprisingly unsurprised by the turn of events. Let's just say I sent a few telegrams before we left Lusk. I've known James Donovan for 20 years. When I told him what was happening, he agreed to look into Harrington's dealings. Nora threw her arms around her uncle. You wonderful, sneaky man. Why didn't you tell us? Didn't want to get your hopes up, Henry replied, patting her back. Wasn't sure he'd find anything in time. Virgil shook his head in amazement. I don't know how to thank you. Thank me by making my niece happy, Henry said simply. That's all the gratitude I need. Marshal Donovan approached them, nodding respectfully to Henry before addressing Virgil. Mr. Grayson, you're free to go for now, but don't leave town. I believe tomorrow's hearing will go quite differently, but we still need to follow proper procedure. I understand, Virgil assured him. I'm not running anymore. They found lodging at a small boarding house on the outskirts of town, away from curious eyes. That evening, as they sat in the boarding house's modest parlor, the reality of what had happened and what might still happen settled over them. Even with Harrington's influence exposed, there's no guarantee the judge will believe my version of events, Virgil cautioned, not wanting Nora to be disappointed if things went sideways. Nora took his hand, her touch reassuring. Have a little faith, Virgil. The truth is finally coming to light. And if it doesn't, he pressed, if they still find me guilty, then we'll appeal, she said firmly. And if that fails, we'll find another way. I'm not giving up on you, Virgil Grayson. Not now, not ever. The conviction in her voice humbled him. Virgil gathered her in his arms, holding her close as if she might disappear. How did I ever deserve you? He whispered against her hair. You didn't have to deserve me, Nora replied softly. You just had to find me under that fallen tree. The next morning, they returned to the courthouse to find it even more crowded than before. News of Marshal Donovan's investigation into Harrington had spread like wildfire through Cheyenne. Judge Porter called the court to order promptly at 9 o'clock. His expression was grave as he addressed the gallery. "Before we resume yesterday's hearing, I must inform the court that Mr. Cooper has provided a signed statement recanting his previous testimony and admitting to accepting payment from Mr. Harrington to lie under oath." Murmurs swept through the courtroom as Porter continued. "Additionally, Mr. Sullivan has amended his testimony, now stating that he did, in fact, see Mr. Blackwell draw his weapon first." Virgil felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. Beside him, Nora squeezed his hand in silent triumph. In light of these developments and the additional evidence provided by Marshal Donovan, this court finds that Virgil Grayson acted in self-defense in the shooting of James Blackwell. All charges are hereby dismissed. The bang of the gavel seemed to echo in Virgil's ears as relief washed over him. It was over. He was free. Nora threw her arms around him, tears of joy streaming down her face. Henry clapped him on the shoulder, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "What did I tell you?" Nora whispered. "The truth counts for something after all." As they made their way out of the courthouse, Marshal Donovan intercepted them. "Mr. Grayson, a word," Virgil nodded, stepping aside with the lawman while Nora and Henry waited nearby. "I've been looking into your background," Donovan said without preamble. "Your work as a bounty hunter was exemplary. Clean captures whenever possible, minimal casualties." "That was a lifetime ago," Virgil replied, uncertain where this was heading. Donovan nodded. "Perhaps. But good men are hard to find in this territory, especially men with your skills who also know when not to use them." He reached into his vest pocket, withdrawing a small object. "The territorial governor has authorized me to expand my operation. I could use a deputy with your experience." He held out a deputy marshal's badge, the metal catching the sunlight. Virgil stared at it, stunned. "You want me to work for you, after everything?" "Because of everything," Donovan corrected. "You've seen both sides of the law. You understand that justice isn't always as simple as a badge and a gun." He glanced at Nora. "Plus, I'm based in Laramie, close enough to Lusk that you wouldn't have to choose between duty and other priorities." The offer was tempting, a chance to use his skills for good, to help ensure others received the justice he'd nearly been denied. And Laramie was indeed close enough to Lusk that he could build a life there with Nora. "Can I think about it?" Virgil asked. Donovan smiled. "Take all the time you need. The offer stands." He tipped his hat and moved on, leaving Virgil to rejoin Nora and Henry. "What was that about?" Nora asked, curiosity evident in her eyes. Virgil told them of Donovan's offer, watching their reactions carefully. "A deputy marshal," Henry mused. "That's a respectable position." "It would mean dividing my time between Laramie and Lusk," Virgil pointed out, his eyes on Nora. "If that's something you'd be willing to consider." Nora's smile was radiant. "I'd consider anything that means a future with you, Virgil Grayson." They left Cheyenne the next day, the city that had loomed so large in Virgil's nightmares, now just another place on the map. The journey back to Lusk seemed shorter somehow, filled with plans and possibilities rather than dread. 2 months later, on a crisp January morning, Virgil Grayson and Nora Ellis were married in the small church in Lusk. Henry gave the bride away, his face beaming with pride. Marshal Donovan stood as Virgil's best man, the deputy marshal's badge now pinned permanently to Virgil's vest. As they exchanged vows, Virgil marveled at the twists of fate that had brought him here: a storm, a fallen tree, a woman in need of rescue who had ended up rescuing him just as surely. The ghosts that had haunted him for so long seemed to fade a little more each day, replaced by the warm certainty of Nora's love. After the ceremony, as friends and neighbors gathered in the Ellis store for the celebration, Virgil pulled his new wife aside for a moment of privacy. "Happy, Mrs. Grayson?" he asked, still amazed that he had the right to call her that. Nora's smile could have lit the darkest night. "More than I ever thought possible." "I keep thinking about that storm," Virgil admitted, drawing her closer. "If it hadn't happened, if that tree hadn't fallen." "Then you would have found me some other way," Nora said with perfect confidence. "Some things are simply meant to be, Virgil. We were trapped, you by your past, me by that tree, and somehow, in freeing each other, we found something neither of us knew we were looking for." Virgil brushed a strand of hair from her face, overwhelmed by the love he felt for this remarkable woman. "You know, for a schoolteacher's daughter, you're surprisingly wise." Nora laughed, the sound as bright and clear as a mountain stream. "And for a former bounty hunter, you're surprisingly gentle." "Only with you," he promised, lowering his lips to hers. As winter gave way to spring and spring to summer, Virgil settled into his new life with a contentment he'd never thought possible. His work as a deputy marshal took him away from Lusk periodically, but he always returned to Nora with stories to tell, and a heart full of longing for her. They made their home in a small but comfortable house on the edge of town, close enough to the store that Nora could continue helping Henry when Virgil was away. In June of 1878, their family grew with the birth of their son, whom they named Henry Thomas Grayson after both Nora's uncle and Virgil's father. The baby had Virgil's dark hair and Nora's expressive green eyes, a perfect blend of them both. Holding his son for the first time, Virgil felt the last of his old life fall away completely, replaced by the simple, profound joy of family. On the child's first birthday, they took him on a picnic to the spot where Virgil had found Nora trapped under the fallen tree. The forest had reclaimed much of the evidence of that fateful night, but Virgil could still identify the exact location. As little Henry played with a wooden toy horse, Virgil and Nora sat hand in hand, contemplating the path that had brought them here. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if you'd continued on your way that night?" Nora asked. "If you hadn't heard me calling for help," Virgil squeezed her hand. "Sometimes. But then I look at you and our son, and I know there was never any other path for me. I was always meant to find you, and I was always meant to be found by you," Nora replied, leaning against his shoulder. "Even if it took a fallen tree to make it happen." Virgil laughed, wrapping his arm around her. "I suppose we both needed a little help from fate." As the years passed, their family grew. A daughter, Sarah, joined them in 1880, followed by another son, James, in 1883. Virgil continued his work with the Marshal's service, earning a reputation for fairness and integrity throughout the territory. Nora divided her time between raising their children and helping at the store, eventually taking over most of the bookkeeping as Henry grew older. In 1885, when Henry decided to retire fully from the business, Virgil and Nora took ownership of Ellis General Merchandise, renaming it Grayson's. The store prospered under their care, becoming a cornerstone of Lusk as the town itself grew with the arrival of the railroad. Through it all, through the joys and sorrows that came with life on the frontier, Virgil never forgot the moment of clarity he'd experienced when he first saw Nora trapped beneath that fallen tree. How saving her had, in turn, saved him. How freeing her had led to his own liberation from the weight of his past. On their 20th wedding anniversary, after the children were asleep, Virgil and Nora sat on the porch of their home, watching fireflies dance in the summer twilight. Nora's hair was touched with silver now, and lines of laughter framed Virgil's eyes, but the love between them had only deepened with time. 20 years, Nora mused, her head resting on Virgil's shoulder. "Sometimes it seems like yesterday that you found me in those woods." Best detour I ever took, Virgil replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. I set out that day looking for nothing but distance between me and my troubles. Instead, I found everything I never knew I wanted. Nora smiled, intertwining her fingers with his. We saved each other, I think. That's the secret of a good marriage, each person freeing the other to become their best self. Virgil considered this, thinking of how far they had both come from that stormy night in 1876. How the frightened, running man he'd been had transformed into someone he could be proud of, a husband, a father, a respected member of his community. You know, he said slowly, in all these years I don't think I've ever properly thanked that tree. Nora laughed, the sound as delightful to him now as it had been the first time he heard it. Perhaps we should plant one in the yard as a memorial. Perhaps we should, Virgil agreed, smiling. A reminder that sometimes the things that trap us can also lead us to freedom, if we're brave enough to face them. As night fell fully around them, Virgil Grayson held his wife close, grateful beyond words for the storm that had changed their course and the fallen tree that had brought them together. In saving Nora, he had found his own salvation, his own path forward. And in the life they had built together, the children they had raised, the love they had nurtured, he had found more joy than he had ever believed possible. It was, he reflected, as the first stars appeared overhead, a fair trade for a rainy detour and the strength to lift a fallen tree.